Friends, welcome to the PCW podcast, Tea for Two. This is the podcast where we get to know people in our community and hear stories of transformation. My name is Pastor Marcy, and we have with us Paul Sanner as our co-host. And Paul and I have been coordinating this podcast because, one, it's fun, it's creative, but it also establishes connection. And we know that Jesus calls us to love our neighbor. And so what better way to love our neighbor than by getting to know our neighbor and getting to know their stories. And so we are excited for this next installment of the PCW podcast where we have our first guest, which we are so looking forward to. Paul, who do we have with us today?
Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing Reverend Leslie Dobbs Allsopp, who recently joined the PCW community as our interim pastor. She's been here a couple of months. We don't think of this as being a hot seat. It's kind of a comfortable kitchen or dining room chair. So welcome, and we'll get started. So the interim pastor role in a congregation is unique. What about that role do you find challenging? And what about it makes you excited to get yourself to work?
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I really like interim work. I kind of fell into it, and it suits me. I suit it. I like what I like about it is I'm usually hired to do a thing, or actually a really long laundry list of things, but they're tangible. And I like that because so much of what we do is not tangible. So, I'll have talked to the hiring team about what they'd like to see happen and talk with the session about what they'd like to see happen. And by the end of my time, I hope some of those things have transpired. So I really like that. I also think I have some undiagnosed ADD. So I have like a breath span of being someplace and then I'm ready to do something else. So that totally works for me in terms of interim ministry. I think what's happening in the church landscape is that we are all in transition all the time, and we should acknowledge it more in the life of the church. I mean, you all have had a lot of lead pastors in the last decade, and that's the reality of where we are, right? So I don't know what that means for interim ministry per se, except that I think nothing is settled. And if we were perhaps a little more honest about that, we might get a little more done in Jesus' name. But I like it. It suits me. I've been doing it since about 2008. And I got into it with the help of a presbytery exec who read my PIF, my CV, when I was trying to get back into congregational ministry. And she said, I have 3 interims, get in the car and drive to them, see which one seems like would be viable. And so there was one that looked really great to me. And that's how I got back into congregational ministry after being out for about 9 years. So,
Yeah, so you're mentioning that you started interim work in the early 2000s. But there was beforehand, you had worked in churches prior, it sounds like, or maybe a church prior. I'm curious. So what are the differences you notice in how you show up with interim work versus installed ministry work?
I don't know if there are differences really. And that was a long time ago. So I was ordained in 1987 and served 3 congregations for about a decade as an associate pastor and as a designated pastor. Took a couple of years off because I had 2 little kids, and then ran grants at Princeton Seminary, where we ended up because my husband teaches there. Ran grants for about 9 years and then got back into congregational ministry doing transitional work. So I'm not sure whether I could speak to the differences.
Yeah, that's fair. And I just totally threw you for a little curveball because that was a question that wasn't sent to you beforehand.
I'm
But
okay with curveballs.
um,
All good.
I'm curious with this. So you talked about there's like lots of different communities that you've worked with, churches. It sounds like you've worked with Princeton, with grants. Um, one, do you have a guess on how many churches you've worked with? And then what is something you notice in churches that almost is like universal, that it's every church group is dynamic and different and unique and beautiful. And there are some things that are just the church experience. I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I counted up. It was interesting to count up because you all were nice enough to give me questions ahead of time. If I count churches like when I was in seminary, it's 12 churches. Otherwise, it's 10 churches, 1 seminary, and 2 presbyteries that I've served in some capacity. I think in every entity that I've served, there's that hardworking minority that does most of the ministry in the life of the church, whether that's a presbytery or a congregation, that, 20% does 80% of the work thing. In every entity I've served, I think people are there because it is a place where they feel known and loved and accepted. I think that's what people find in churches. And in every entity I've served, there's toleration of bullies that is unhealthy. And I think that might be the shadow side of being known well and loved, is that people put up with each other's bad behavior in churches in a way that maybe they wouldn't put up with it out in the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you notice some of those patterns, and that's something that maybe, can be a comfort to PCW, is that
Yes.
we're not alone in this. And
No.
we're not unique. And that can actually be kind of comforting to know
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Mhm.
Well, I have a question about kind of your personal journey. So in a congregation, whoever it is, we're hopefully being transformed into people that God is calling us to be all the time, whether we're working at the church or called or a congregant, but everyone gets to be transformed. So can you tell us about a time when you've been leading a congregation where you have been, let's say, maybe unexpectedly transformed and realized that your life, wow, this is or looking back, like I'm different because this happened in this place.
I did, I served 3 interim positions where I was either the solo pastor or the head of staff of a congregation that just wasn't very big. And so the third one, which was the Presbyterian Church in Woodbridge, New Jersey, was calling a really fabulous woman to be their pastor. And they already had an associate pastor was a woman. So between the 3 of us, there was this synergy thing that was happening. And as the woman who was coming in as the pastor was leaving her presbytery, she was talking to her presbytery exec about me and saying, this person does really good interim work. You might look at her for some of the stuff that's in our presbytery, different presbytery. And so the presbytery exec called me up, also a woman. So we had this sort of the collaboration of the old girls network starting, which was really lovely. And she called me up and talked to me and put me in touch with the first large congregation that I had the opportunity to serve, and was in the Philadelphia Presbytery. At the time, was about an 850 member congregation. I'd never thought of myself in that way, and I never sought out that kind of job. And so they interviewed me, and we went back and forth, and they'd never had a woman in that position. I'd never done that kind of ministry before. And we all agreed we would just sort of take a chance on it and see what happened. And, within 3 weeks of being in that position, I realized how much fun it was to be a head of staff. And I just never really thought about it before or seen myself in that role, but I really loved the synergy of working with the staff, and I really loved the opportunity to be the lead preacher, but not the all the time preacher. I just loved all of it. And it was a huge transformation for me. It was such a God, oh, duh, this is what you're supposed to be doing moment. And that was in 2015, I guess. And so everything I've done since then is a big job, quote unquote, either big church or presbytery. And really transformational to figure out how to keep all those balls in the air at the same time, how to nurture a staff, because I think that's what the job of the leader in this kind of ecosystem is to nurture the staff and make sure everybody feels like they're equipped to do their work. And to learn how to not feel like I'm responsible for everything, because I'm not. God is. But I think a lot of people fall into the trap when they have this kind of role of feeling like, oh, well, it all rests on my shoulders and it lives or dies with me. It doesn't live or die with me. I think my job is to provide value add, but it doesn't live or die with me. But that was a huge transformation for me. It wasn't something that I was thinking about or seeking out, but now it's the thing I do. This is my fourth large church in a not very long span of time, with presbyteries thrown in the middle of it. So we'll see what the next thing is. But I really like it. It's really fun.
That's amazing. And
We're happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here. But you just don't ever know, right, where God's going to put you.
Yeah. So speaking of where God is going to put you, shifting gears just a touch, we know that you live on Princeton's campus. That's something that you've shared. And so I'm curious, what has that experience been like living on a campus? And then what is something you've noticed among students over the years?
So yeah, we've lived on the campus of Princeton Seminary it'll be 25 years. It's amazing. We were in an apartment for 4 years. Our kids were little, and then we've been in one of the big houses on the seminary campus for about 20 years now. And it's always been like a residential community. I think that's shifting a little bit, but that's sort of been the ethos. It's a residential community. So there are dorms on campus, and a lot of professors live on campus. And it's been great for my husband, who's visually impaired and can get around, doesn't have to be driven or drive to work. That's been amazing. It's a lot of green space. It's a beautiful place to live. A house we would certainly never be able to afford to buy. A great place for our kids to grow up. You can walk into town, you can get wherever you need to go. We've sort of took it for granted until our kids started looking at colleges, and they are 6 years apart. So we saw this twice. They had very clear ideas about what a campus should look like, because they grew up on a campus. And it sort of disproportionately, I think, affected the decisions they were making, because they had this idea in their head about what a school should look like and what the campus should look like. So that was really interesting to me, to observe that. It's fun to live on a campus. It's mostly private. It's not too often that you feel like, oh, there are people in our space. We have some, they're not ours, obviously, they're the seminaries. We have some sakura cherry trees in the backyard. And so every spring we have, in Princeton, and where all the cherry trees are on the campus, we have Japanese people come through because of the spring veneration of the cherry trees that happens. And so you'll find random people in the backyard. And when our kids were little, they would go, "Mom, the tree people are here." Because it was just weird having strange people in your backyard space. So there is some of that public stuff. In terms of, I think the student body is way more diverse than it was when we started. It used to be all young Caucasian people. It's very much the seminary where people go to school right after college. That has shifted some. There are more second career people here. It's certainly more racially, ethnically diverse than it was. Less than half of the students who go to school here have any intention of serving a church. So that is a huge shift. It's not exactly clear what people are doing coming to school here now. Tuition is free, so it's less expensive than it was. I think some people are here just to sort of discern their next step. And some people are here because they think they're going on for PhD. Yeah. But that's a huge shift in my adult lifetime. We graduated from here. We both have an MDiv from here, and that's where we met the first week of school. And when we were in school, everyone was going to go on to ministry, to congregational ministry. And so over my lifetime, that has totally shifted. Mm. And it's, they're kind of, I think the administration is they're catching up to the reality, but they're a little late. So now there are some Masters of Arts programs rather than Master of Divinity. There are concentrations in like ecology or something else to sort of bring in different kinds of students than would have been here traditionally.
So you and your husband, you went to seminary, and I understand that he is a professor. So mm-hmm. That makes you both religious scholars in some form. So is that, what are dinner table conversations like in your home?
Yes, he's a professor of Old Testament. So he did his MDiv here at Princeton Seminary and then went to Johns Hopkins for his philology degree. He's an ancient Near Eastern philologist, but he's also a literary theorist. That is sort of his second love, his avocational love. I think our dinner conversations are like everybody else's. What did you do today? How was your day? He doesn't, the last church I served, one of the elders who's sort of an old school guy, wanted to know, did my husband help me write my sermons? Which I thought was kind of a sexist question. I don't think he meant it to be, but it was. I learned a long time ago, if I asked Chip for any sort of input, what I want is a paragraph. And what I get are 5 books opened to certain chapters that I'm expected to read. So I don't do that because it's a little more than I'm interested in. But I he'll talk to me about what he's working on. I'll talk to him about how the day was. I like that we have the same last name. It's a pain having a hyphenated name. Seemed like a good idea at the time. but it's lovely that we have the same last name because he has a world and I have a world, and people understand that we're married to each other, that we're connected to each other, and that our worlds are tangentially connected. There are lots of erudite Bible conversations that happen in this house because we're right on campus and it's easy to get to us, and people stop by and have a drink or whatever. And so there's a lot of like mind-numbing Old Testament philology conversation that happens at my house, but I am not a participant in said conversation.
Absolutely. I know that I guess to shift into some more fun questions, I know you and Chip are football fans. And so I'm curious, what teams do you root for and why?
So the family is Arsenal. And that's because of our younger son, Henry, who fell in love with Arsenal. And so we've all followed Arsenal for a long time. We started following football, soccer, when Chip did a sabbatical year in Jerusalem, and Henry was a baby and Will was like 6. And the cable that we could get included Sky Sports. So we got soccer and rugby every weekend. And if we wanted to watch basketball, you had to be up in the middle of the night. They would stream it, you would see it live, but it was all weird times. What were the times we could really watch was soccer. And so that's when we first started watching soccer. And then we came back to the States, and Henry, who's an avid soccer player all his life and an avid watcher of soccer, fell in love with Arsenal at a time when they were known as the Invincibles. And so it was just a really great time. So we've followed Arsenal all our lives, but then I went rogue and fell in love with Liverpool. So I'm actually apostate, and you really aren't allowed to shift your English Premier League club like you have it till you die. So everybody's still been trying to figure out, but I fell in love with Liverpool plays what's known as heavy metal football. They run and gun. They just kind of swarm the field. It's really fun soccer to watch. And we just lost our coach. He is not retiring, but he resigned. So it'll be an interesting time in the life of Liverpool to see what happens next. It's 36 weeks a year. It's like it coincides with the academic and program year. And then you have to take the summer off because they're not playing, or they're playing in Champions stuff or whatever. It's just a really nice rhythm to life. I really love that. So our weekends are church, and I'm usually still writing a sermon on Saturday, so it's all tied up together. I'm also I went to Duke for undergrad, so I'm an avid basketball fan. So I have a lot of sports to watch. Not interested in baseball. My husband grew up a member of the Florida Gator Nation, so we have a lot of American football in our house too. A lot of sports. we can't cut the cable cord because we have all these sports that we watch.
That's wonderful.
It is.
I love, yeah, sports are so fun, and the camaraderie you get with your team.
It's so interesting, right? A stadium full of 65,000 people singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" is a religious experience. And it, you sort of think, what is it that we aren't doing? What is it that we don't have that they have? It's really interesting as a person who builds community and helps people make meaning of their lives. This is live or die stuff. sports fandom, and certainly soccer sports fandom. It's DNA, all your life, bigger than you stuff. And isn't that kind of what we're supposed to be about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, curious, what have you been learning lately? These are some of the questions that Paul and I will be asking every
Mhm.
single one of our guests. But what have you been learning lately?
A lot of names, trying to learn a lot of names. It would be really helpful if people had their pictures in our database thing, which is the bummer when it's not staff inputted, it's inputted by the people themselves because they don't want to scrounge around and find a picture. So I'm learning a lot of names. And right now we're thinking a lot about, so we just bought what will be our retirement home. So we're thinking a lot about retirement realities and what that looks like. And, wandering around this house going, most of this won't go with us. What are the financial realities we need to get our in line? What do we need to be thinking about? And we're 62. And I think Chip will be retiring earlier than he would have been otherwise because of his decline in vision. So learning a lot about that, talking to all the financial people, it's exhausting. This whole end of adulting is tiring. It really is.
The learning can be tiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But that's kind of where we're at right now. Names as I'm starting this new thing and then thinking about what the end things are.
So other than names, what's been challenging for you lately?
Challenging. I think what I'm finding challenging, and this is across the board with these big, mostly Caucasian, affluent churches that I've been serving. And I can't figure this out, right? How do we challenge our role in the white supremacy of our denomination, of our milieu, of how do we look honestly at our place and space in this and what that means for our ministries and what that means for the people we serve, when the people we serve feel like they are hanging on by their fingertips, which is such a total, first world white way to look at it. So we aren't running the school board and we aren't in charge of everything in town anymore. And that is it's a real loss to people who remember those times, but it's not, and I don't want to minimize that because it's real loss. But I think the challenge of our time in mainline Protestantism is figuring out where we're complicit in white supremacy and what that means for how we order and live our lives in service to God. And what does it mean? What does it mean to have just a glimmer of awareness of that as staff people? And then how on earth do we help our people that we serve to start prayerfully thinking about this and living into this in ways that it isn't so overwhelming that people just, can't and won't address it. It's the challenge of our time.
Amen.
Well, that's very powerful and large. We move to something less powerful and small.
Oh, good.
What do you hate to run out of?
What do I hate to run out of? Wow. Hmm. Needlework projects really stresses me out if I don't have something
Yeah.
on hand.
Awesome. And then,
I live with a yarn worker in many different guises. So
She
I,
who dies with the most craft
so,
stuff wins. Yeah,
so she and I in some ancillary way. I,
absolutely.
I relate to that.
mhm.
And toilet paper, of course.
Of course,
I think
that is the
I think
worst.
we're, after the pandemic, right? Aren't we all like
Yeah,
terrified of that? It's like a knee-jerk thing.
gotta get more.
Yes.
Um, and what has made you smile? This is our final question.
What has made me smile? Both our kids are in really good space right now, and so that totally makes us both smile.
Mhm.
And buying a house 0.6 miles from the beach has pretty much made us smile.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today. I didn't ask you what mug do you have with you today? I saw that you were drinking out of a mug. Is there a special story behind that mug?
Is there a special story? This is from Jerusalem. It's from the Karakashian uh, tile workshop there. There are two Armenian pottery families going in Jerusalem, and so this is one of them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Tea for Two, the PCW podcast. And on behalf of Paul and I, thank you to all who are listening and for joining us to hear more about who Leslie is. And so thank you. And we look forward to seeing you again the next time we gather for Tea for Two.
Thank you.